Right after my own husband threw our divorce papers at my face, right in the middle of a crowded Thanksgiving dinner, he pulled out his phone and put my mother on speaker. He told her to come pick up her useless daughter because he was sick of carrying dead weight. He thought he was tossing away a penniless burden. He had no idea he had just declared war on the chief executive officer of Vanguard Apex. My name is Kendra. I am 33 and for 4 years I lived a double life. In Atlanta's elite finance world, I am a ruthless investor. To my husband Julian and his family, I was just a freelance data entry clerk who barely bought her own groceries. I hid my wealth seeking genuine love, not my family's legacy. But as I sat in the corner of my sister-in-law's lavish living room, I realized that true love was the one thing Julian was completely incapable of giving. The tension had been building since we arrived at the Buckhead estate, belonging to Victoria, Julian's brother's wife. Victoria was a textbook social climber. She constantly boasted about her old money, though anyone with actual connections knew her family was drowning in debt. She made it her personal mission to ensure everyone knew she was the reigning matriarch. Her house was a fortress of pretension filled with guests she only invited to show off. I sat on a velvet armchair far away from the loud, boastful laughter of Julian's colleagues. I had my laptop open quietly typing away. I was actually finalizing a massive acquisition deal for Vanguard, but to everyone else in the room, I was just pathetic Kendra desperately trying to scrape together a few dollars on a holiday. Julian approached me, his jaw clenched tight. He wore a tailored suit bought on a credit card he could barely afford. He looked down at me with an expression of pure disgust. "Can you put that cheap piece of plastic away?" He hissed, his voice sharp enough to cut through the background music. "You are embarrassing me. My regional director is standing right over there and my wife is sitting in the corner doing minimum wage gig work. Do you have any idea how that makes me look?" I calmly saved my document and looked up at him. "I am just finishing a project, Julian. It will only take another minute." Before he could reply, Victoria glided over holding a martini glass. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my simple, unbranded black dress. She smiled, but it was a cold, calculating expression designed to inflict maximum humiliation. "Julian, darling, leave her alone," Victoria purred, making sure her voice carried to the guests standing nearby. "If Kendra does not type her little fingers to the bone, how will she ever afford to buy you a proper anniversary gift?" It must be so difficult, Kendra struggling to make ends meet, while Julian carries the financial weight of your household. "I have a friend who needs a new maid. I could put in a good word for you if your typing gigs dry up." A few of the nearby guests chuckled. Julian did not defend me. He never did. Instead, he puffed out his chest, clearly enjoying the validation of his superiority. "It is exhausting, Victoria." Julian sighed, shaking his head. "I just got promoted to vice president. I am moving into a different tier of society. I need a partner who can stand beside me at galas, someone who understands high-level networking. Not someone who hunts for digital coupons and wears off-the-rack clothes to a formal Thanksgiving dinner." I closed my laptop. The sheer audacity of his words was amusing. Julian's promotion had actually been orchestrated by my quiet influence behind the scenes, a fact he was entirely oblivious to. He genuinely believed his mediocre talent earned him that title. "I am wearing this dress because it is comfortable," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "And I work because I believe in being productive. I did not realize my presence was such a burden to your social climbing, Julian." His face turned red. He hated when I spoke to him with calm authority. He wanted me to cower. He wanted me to be the weak, dependent woman he could demean to make himself feel powerful. "Do not talk back to me like that," he snapped. He reached down, grabbed my laptop and threw it roughly onto the sofa. "I am done with this. I am done with you dragging me down." "Julian, what are you doing?" I asked, standing up to face him. The room had gone completely silent. The music still played softly through the hidden speakers, but every guest had stopped talking. All eyes were glued to us. Victoria took a sip of her martini, a look of absolute triumph washing over her pale face. This was exactly the kind of drama she thrived on. Julian reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket. He pulled out a folded stack of thick legal documents. Without a second of hesitation, he threw the heavy stack directly at my chest. The thick sheets hit me with a dull slap and scattered across the expensive Persian rug. The crisp white pages starkly contrasted with the ornate patterns beneath my feet. "I am divorcing you right now," Julian announced, his voice booming so that every single person in the room could hear his declaration. "I already signed them. I am done pretending that this marriage is working. I am moving up in the world, Kendra, and you are nothing but an anchor around my neck." I looked down at the divorce papers, then back up at the man I had spent the last 4 years of my life with. There was no sadness in his eyes, only a cruel, vain smugness. The game was finally over. "You chose Thanksgiving dinner to do this," I asked, keeping my voice remarkably steady. "You brought me to your brother's house surrounded by your colleagues and your family, just to throw legal documents at me." "It is the perfect time," Victoria chimed in, stepping closer to Julian. "We are all gathered here to give thanks, and Julian is finally thankful to be shedding his greatest liability. You never fit in with us, Kendra. You lack the pedigree, the ambition, and frankly the class required to sit at this prestigious table." Julian smiled at his sister-in-law, clearly emboldened by her support. He straightened his tie and gestured toward the grand archway leading to the foyer. "I did not just bring you here to end things, Kendra. I brought you here so you could finally see what a real partner looks like. Someone who actually understands my trajectory." As if on cue, a woman walked into the living room. She was tall, dressed in a sleek, tailored crimson gown that screamed expensive boutique. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she carried a designer handbag that cost more than what Julian believed I made in a year. I recognized her immediately. It was Chloe, his executive assistant from the finance firm. Chloe glided across the room with a confident smirk, completely ignoring my presence. She walked straight to Julian and wrapped her arm intimately around his waist. Julian leaned down and kissed her passionately right in front of me, right in front of his entire family and all his corporate guests. No one gasped. No one looked away in shame. Instead, Victoria clapped her hands together in sheer delight. "Chloe, darling, you look absolutely stunning tonight," Victoria gushed, leaning in to kiss the mistress on both cheeks. "That color is perfect on you. Julian is so incredibly lucky to have a sophisticated woman by his side." "Thank you, Victoria," Chloe replied, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She finally turned her gaze to me, looking me up and down with blatant pity. "It is so nice to finally meet you, Kendra. Julian has told me so much about your little data entry projects. It is very sweet that you try to contribute, but a man in Julian's position needs a woman who can navigate the boardroom, not just a keyboard." The betrayal was absolute and staggering. He had not just been cheating on me, he had integrated his mistress into his family. Victoria clearly knew about Chloe. Julian's brother likely knew. They had all sat around smiling at me, knowing this public execution was planned for tonight. "So this is your grand plan," I said, looking directly into Julian's eyes. "You cheat on your wife with your assistant, bring her to a family holiday, and throw divorce papers at me like a theatrical performance. You truly believe this makes you look powerful?" "It makes me look like a man who knows what he wants and takes it," Julian sneered. "Chloe comes from a prominent family in Buckhead. Her father is a senior partner at a massive law firm. She brings actual value to my life. What do you bring? Kendra, you bring cheap clothes, embarrassing gig work, and a mother who probably lives in a trailer park." The mention of my mother sent a sudden, sharp thrill through my veins. Evelyn was not a woman who lived in a trailer park. Evelyn was the iron-fisted matriarch of a financial dynasty, a woman who routinely crushed arrogant men like Julian before her morning coffee. "Leave my mother out of this," I warned him softly. Julian laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Why? Because you are ashamed of her, because she is just as pathetic and broke as you are. Actually, this gives me a brilliant idea." He pulled his smartphone from his pocket. "Since you do not even own a car because you insist on taking the public bus to save pennies, you need a ride home. And I certainly am not driving you. Let us call your precious mother to come collect her garbage." "Julian, do not do this," I said, projecting a fake tone of panic. I needed him to dig his grave as deep as possible. "Oh, I am doing it," he mocked, scrolling through his contacts until he found the emergency number I had provided him years ago. He pressed the call button and deliberately tapped the speakerphone icon, holding the device up for the entire room to hear. The phone rang loudly. It rang twice. The room was dead silent, buzzing with toxic anticipation. Victoria leaned in, her eyes wide with greedy excitement. Chloe smirked, resting her head on Julian's shoulder. A sharp, chilling, and authoritative voice answered, "Speak." Julian let out a loud, theatrical sigh, rolling his eyes to ensure everyone recognized his immense burden. He held the phone higher, practically preening under the spotlight, mistaking my mother's icy command for blue-collar exhaustion. "Is this Evelyn?" Julian asked, his tone dripping with fake courtesy and overwhelming condescension. "This is Julian, your soon-to-be former son-in-law. I am calling to do you a massive favor tonight. I am divorcing your daughter. She is sitting right here in my brother's beautiful Buckhead estate, and frankly, she has overstayed her welcome. I am thankful to drop this dead weight." The line remained perfectly quiet. There was no gasp, no frantic motherly panic. There was only the faint rustle of turning pages, followed by the soft clink of fine china. Julian, clearly annoyed he had not provoked a dramatic reaction, pushed harder. He pulled his mistress closer to the phone as if my mother could see. "Are you deaf, old woman?" Julian barked, dropping the polite facade. "I am done with her. I was recently promoted to vice president. I am making real money now, networking with Atlanta's true elite. Kendra is entirely useless to me. She contributes nothing except her pathetic data entry paychecks. I am upgrading my life with a woman of actual pedigree. So here's the deal. Drive your beat-up sedan over here, pick up your useless daughter, and get her off this property before security drags her to the curb. I do not want her anymore." Victoria covered her mouth to stifle a cruel laugh. The other guests exchanged amused glances, thoroughly enjoying the public execution of my dignity. "Are you quite finished?" Evelyn's voice finally cut through the speaker. It possessed a razor-sharp frequency that instantly dropped the temperature in the room. Julian scoffed, puffing out his chest. "I am finished when she is off this property. Follow the sound of money you will never have." "I know exactly where the property is," Evelyn replied smoothly. "Your brother purchased it 3 years ago with a high-interest subprime mortgage refinanced twice. The gate is a cheap wrought iron imitation. Tell me, Julian, did you actually think you were marrying a peasant?" Julian froze for a fraction of a second. Victoria's smug smile faltered at the painfully accurate assessment of her finances. Julian quickly shook his head, recovering his bravado to protect his fragile ego. "Just get here and collect your garbage," Julian snapped, attempting to regain control. "Open the gate," Evelyn commanded, her tone shifting to absolute steel. "I am already outside." The line went dead. Julian lowered his phone, blinking in confusion. He burst into boisterous laughter. "Did you hear that crazy old bat?" he announced to his captivated audience. "She says she is already outside. What did she take the city bus and camp out on the sidewalk?" Victoria recovered her posture, smoothing down her tight designer dress. "Well, we certainly cannot leave her out there. The Neighbors Association will issue a fine for loitering. Let us go see this grand arrival." Chloe giggled, kissing Julian's cheek. "You are so patient, Julian. Dealing with these people must be absolutely draining for you." "It was a charity case," Julian agreed loudly. "But I am finally free." I remained seated, not bothering to defend myself. I did not shed a single tear. I simply picked up my laptop and placed it in my tote bag, smoothing the fabric of my black dress. It was not a cheap, off-the-rack garment. It was custom unbranded silk that cost more than his entire wardrobe. I had hidden my wealth flawlessly, wanting a normal marriage free from the sycophants who usually circled Vanguard Apex. I wanted a partner who loved me. Instead, I found an arrogant man who needed to crush me to feel tall. "Come on, Kendra," Julian taunted, gesturing toward the front doors. "Let us go greet your ride. I want to see the rust bucket she drove up here." The guests moved toward the grand foyer, holding crystal glasses, eager for the second act. Victoria led the way, practically skipping toward the mahogany doors. I followed at a measured pace. My heart was not racing with fear. It beat with the steady rhythm of anticipation. Julian had no idea what he had summoned. Evelyn was a titan of industry who controlled billions across the eastern seaboard, and Julian had just publicly insulted her only child on a speakerphone. Victoria pulled the front doors open with a theatrical flourish. The chilly November air swept into the foyer, bringing a sound that made everyone freeze in their tracks. It was not the engine of a beat-up sedan. It was a synchronized mechanical growl, vibrating through the ground, a threatening rumble that shook the foundation of Victoria's prized mansion. Julian stepped out onto the porch, shielding his eyes from a blinding array of headlights. Down at the end of the long, manicured driveway, Victoria's precious wrought iron gate stood firmly closed. But it did not stay that way for long. A massive pitch-black tactical SUV accelerated without warning. The reinforced steel bumper slammed directly into the center of the gate. The metal groaned and buckled. With an explosive crash echoing through the affluent neighborhood, the gates were ripped violently off their hinges into the landscaping. Victoria screamed, dropping her martini glass. It shattered on the marble porch. Julian stumbled backward, his arrogant smirk wiped from his face. He grabbed Chloe's arm, his eyes wide with terror. Through the thick dust of the destroyed entrance, the lead SUV rolled smoothly up the driveway. In perfect militaristic synchronization, 5 more identical armored SUVs followed closely behind it. The convoy of 6 luxury Titans glided forward, their tinted windows reflecting the exterior lighting of the estate. They came to a precise halt, forming an imposing barricade that entirely blocked Julian's leased Porsche and the rest of the guests' vehicles. The doors of the lead vehicle swung open and absolute power finally arrived at the doorstep. 4 men in tailored black suits stepped out of the vehicles simultaneously, their earpieces glinting under the harsh glare of the porch lights. They moved with military precision, forming a protective perimeter around the second SUV. The rear door of the armored Cadillac Escalade swung open, and a sleek stiletto heel touched the crushed gravel. Evelyn emerged from the plush leather interior, radiating an aura of absolute uncompromising authority. She wore a pristine white Chanel trench coat, draped perfectly over a tailored charcoal suit. Her posture impeccable. A heavy, authentic diamond necklace caught the ambient light, refracting it into blinding prisms across the stunned faces of the guests. She did not look like a woman who lived in a trailer park as Julian had so eagerly claimed. She looked like a monarch arriving to inspect a newly conquered territory, exuding the undeniable power of black excellence that demanded immediate respect. The silence on the porch was deafening. The only sound was the slow, deliberate crunch of Evelyn's heels stepping over the mangled debris of Victoria's ruined gate. She walked with terrifying grace, her sharp gaze sweeping over the terrified party guests. She paused briefly to inspect Chloe's trembling form, dismissing the mistress with a mere fraction of a second, and finally locked her eyes onto Julian. Her expression was completely devoid of emotion, a blank mask of corporate ruthlessness that I had seen her use to break veteran hedge fund managers during hostile takeovers. Julian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his tight collar. The imposing reality of the tactical convoy was staring him right in the face, but his fragile narcissistic ego immediately scrambled to construct a lie he could actually digest. He could not accept that he had just insulted a Titan. "You have got to be kidding me!" Julian scoffed, a high-pitched, nervous laugh escaping his lips. He stepped forward, planting his hands on his hips to feign a confidence he clearly did not possess. "Is this some kind of elaborate... You actually went out and rented a fleet of cars for a dramatic entrance. How many payday loans did you have to take out to afford this little stunt? Evelyn, do you think smoke and mirrors will change the fact that your daughter is a broke freelancer? I am a vice president now. You cannot intimidate me with leased vehicles and hired actors." Victoria finally found her voice, stepping out from behind her husband's shadow. Her face was contorted with absolute fury, her carefully constructed high society persona crumbling into shrill panic. "You destroyed my gate," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at the crushed metal in the driveway. "Do you have any idea how much that custom ironwork cost? I am calling the police right now. You cannot just hire a bunch of street thugs to crash a private Thanksgiving dinner in Buckhead. You and your pathetic daughter are going to rot in a jail cell. You will be paying for this property damage for the rest of your miserable lives." Evelyn did not even blink at their frantic barking. She treated them exactly like what they were to her, irrelevant, buzzing insects. She walked right past Julian, not even granting him the basic dignity of eye contact, and stopped directly in front of me. She reached out with a gentle manicured hand, and adjusted the collar of my black silk dress. "Are you finally finished playing house with these clowns, Kendra?" she asked, her voice calm and deeply maternal, yet carrying an acoustic weight that echoed loudly across the silent porch. "I told you 4 years ago that a wolf cannot survive on a diet of table scraps. It is time to come home." "I am finished, mother," I replied, meeting her steady, proud gaze. I thought humility might teach him character. I wanted to see if he could love me for me, without the shadow of Vanguard Apex hanging over our marriage. I was wrong. He is exactly the kind of small, greedy man you said he was. "Hey, I am talking to you," Julian yelled, taking an aggressive step toward my mother, absolutely furious at being ignored in front of his corporate superiors. "Do not pretend you are some kind of mafia boss. I know Kendra's background. I know she struggles to pay her half of our utility bills every single month. You are probably drowning in massive credit card debt just to lease these cars for a single night. You are not fooling anyone here. Chloe's father is a senior partner at a major law firm, and he will bury you in litigation for what you just did to my brother's property." Evelyn slowly turned her head to look at Julian. She did not raise her voice, but her words struck like a physical blow. "Marcus," she said quietly. One of the men in tailored suits stepped forward seamlessly, holding a sleek silver aluminum briefcase. He clicked the combination locks and flipped it open, revealing neatly banded stacks of crisp, uncirculated $100 bills. Evelyn reached in, pulled out 2 thick stacks, and casually tossed them directly at Julian's chest. The heavy bundles hit his tailored jacket with a thud and dropped to the floor, landing in the dust of the broken gate. "That is $20,000, Evelyn stated coldly, her eyes pinning him to the spot. "10,000 for the cheap, mass-produced gate my driver scratched, and 10,000 for the severe trauma of having to breathe the same recycled air as you for the last 5 minutes. Keep the change, Julian. Buy yourself a suit that actually fits your shoulders, because that one makes you look entirely unremarkable." Julian stared down at the stacks of cash by his polished shoes, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Victoria let out a strangled gasp, her eyes locked greedily onto the money on the ground. She instinctively took a step toward it, her fake aristocratic pride warring with her desperate hidden debt. Chloe shrank back against the doorframe, suddenly realizing that her supposedly powerful new boyfriend was being effortlessly dismantled by a woman who treated $20,000 like discarded pocket change. The gaslighting was failing. The illusion of their superiority was shattering piece by piece under the crushing weight of undeniable generational wealth. Victoria's trembling hands dropped to her sides as she stared at the scattered $100 bills. She opened her mouth to scream for her husband, but no sound came out. Evelyn stepped closer, her heels crunching on the shattered glass from Victoria's broken martini glass. She invaded Victoria's personal space, forcing the woman to shrink back against the mahogany doorframe. "If you ever speak to my daughter like that again, I will buy the bank that holds the mortgage on this gaudy, mass-produced home," Evelyn stated, her voice a lethal whisper. "I will foreclose on it in 3 days, and I will personally supervise the bulldozers as they level it to the dirt. Do not test me, little girl. You are playing a dangerous game with people who own the board." Julian, desperate to salvage his shattered pride in front of his regional director, made the worst mistake of his life. He lunged forward and grabbed my mother's arm. "You cannot come onto my brother's property and threaten us," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Before my mother's security detail could even draw their weapons, Evelyn reacted. With blinding speed and ruthless precision, she ripped her arm from his grasp and delivered a resounding, open-handed slap directly across Julian's face. The sharp crack echoed across the silent lawn like a gunshot. Julian stumbled backward, clutching his rapidly reddening cheek, his eyes wide with absolute shock. "You do not touch me," Evelyn commanded, adjusting the cuff of her Chanel coat without breaking eye contact. "You do not speak to me. You are nothing but a parasitic footnote in my daughter's life. I gave you 4 years to prove you were worthy of her grace. Instead, you proved you were nothing but a fragile, insecure little boy who needs to break women down to feel like a man." Chloe whimpered, pressing herself flat against the brick exterior of the house, desperately hoping to become invisible. Evelyn turned her piercing gaze toward the mistress. "And you," she sneered, looking Chloe up and down. You think securing a vice president at a mid-tier finance firm is the pinnacle of success. You are fighting for scraps at the bottom of the barrel. Enjoy him. He will be completely bankrupt by Monday morning. I walked down the steps of the porch, leaving the stunned guests behind. I stopped right in front of Julian. He was still holding his bleeding pride, his eyes darting frantically between me, my mother, and the imposing wall of armored vehicles blocking his exit. Kendra, what is this? He stammered. His bravado entirely vanished, replaced by a pathetic whining desperation. Who is she? What is Vanguard Apex? I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile that I had kept hidden for 4 long years. Vanguard Apex is the private equity firm that just authorized the corporate buyout of your entire company, Julian, I explained calmly. And I am the one who sits at the head of the boardroom table. You wanted a woman who understands high-level networking. You wanted someone who could navigate the elite tiers of society. You had her, but you were too blind, too arrogant, and too incredibly stupid to see it. I reached down to my left hand. I grasped the diamond wedding band he had bought on a payment plan. I slid the ring off my finger. The metal felt heavy, weighed down by years of lies, emotional neglect, and constant manipulation. I held the ring up to the light for a brief second, making sure every single person on that porch was watching me. Then I dropped it directly onto the scattered stacks of cash at his feet. The small piece of jewelry hit the concrete with a pathetic hollow ping. Consider that my final contribution to your pathetic social climbing, I said, my voice echoing in the cold November air. You said you wanted to drop dead weight. So did I. You are entirely free to pursue your mediocre ambitions with your new assistant. But remember this moment, Julian. Remember the exact second you realized you threw away an empire because you wanted to feel like a king in a sandbox. I turned my back on him and walked toward the pristine black Maybach waiting at the center of the convoy. One of the men in a tailored suit immediately opened the heavy armored rear door for me. I slid into the luxurious leather interior, feeling the suffocating weight of my disguised life finally lifting from my shoulders. The plush seats embraced me, a stark contrast to the uncomfortable, threadbare existence I had forced myself to endure. Evelyn gave Julian one last look of absolute disgust. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out another thick stack of $100 bills, and threw it directly at Victoria's face. The money cascaded down the woman's expensive dress. That is for the landscaping. Evelyn mocked, her tone dripping with venomous satisfaction. Hire someone to fix those bushes. They look incredibly cheap. Evelyn turned and walked back to her Escalade. The security detail moved in perfect unison, slipping back into their respective vehicles without a single word. The engines roared to life, a synchronized mechanical symphony that drowned out Victoria's sudden hysterical sobbing. The convoy reversed seamlessly, navigating the destroyed remnants of the gate, and pulled out into the affluent neighborhood streets. Looking through the tinted rear window, I watched Julian fall to his knees on the porch. He was frantically gathering the cash my mother had thrown, scrambling in the dirt like a desperate beggar. His colleagues, the regional director, and the other elite guests just stared at him in utter revulsion. Chloe stood frozen, looking at the man she thought was her golden ticket, now humiliated and broken on his brother's porch. The illusion of their superiority had been utterly destroyed, replaced by the terrifying realization of what they had just unleashed. I leaned back against the headrest, a profound sense of peace washing over my entire tired body. The interior of the Maybach was completely silent, insulated from the chaos we had just left behind. I pulled my smartphone from my designer clutch, the screen illuminating my face in the darkened cabin. For 4 years, I had meticulously managed my secret finances, funneling a heavily restricted allowance into a dummy corporation to maintain the illusion of my poverty. That dummy corporation, Apex Holdings, was the exact entity that issued Julian his beloved platinum credit card and held the lease to his prized sports car. He thought his promotion secured those perks. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his entire lavish lifestyle was directly funded by the wife he had just publicly discarded. I opened my encrypted banking application and stared at his active accounts. Julian wanted to play games with corporate networking, so it was time to show him how the actual board members played. Across town, Julian was desperately trying to salvage his shattered ego. I did not need to be physically present to know exactly what he was doing. My security team had already tapped into the GPS tracker on his vehicle. According to the blinking blue dot on my screen, he had fled his brother's destroyed property and driven Chloe straight to the Capitol Grill in the heart of downtown Atlanta. He needed to prove to his mistress that the scene on the porch was just a fluke, a stunt pulled by a family. He needed to reassert his dominance by buying expensive champagne, ordering the finest steak, and swiping that heavy metal card to show her he was still the golden ticket she bargained for. I tapped the screen of my phone, navigating to the specific corporate account that kept his false reality afloat. My thumb hovered over the red suspension icon. I imagined him sitting in that dim, dark leather restaurant, puffing out his chest, bragging to Chloe about his upcoming bonuses and how they were finally rid of my dead weight. I smiled, pressing the icon. The system prompted me for a confirmation code. I typed a single decisive text message to my wealth manager. The message read to freeze all secondary accounts immediately and execute the repossession clause on vehicle asset 4. Within 3 seconds, the status indicator on my screen shifted from active to permanently suspended. Inside the restaurant, Julian confidently signaled for the check. He did not even bother looking at the exorbitant total before dropping his shiny platinum card onto the leather folio. He leaned across the table, taking Chloe's hand, whispering sweet promises about their bright, wealthy future together. The waiter returned 2 minutes later, looking deeply uncomfortable. He leaned down and whispered that the card had been declined. Julian scoffed, assuming it was a simple bank error. He loudly berated the waiter for incompetence, drawing the attention of nearby diners. He aggressively pulled out his backup card, a standard credit account, linked to his personal checking. The waiter returned even faster this time. That card was also completely frozen. My wealth manager had been thorough, triggering a cascade of security locks on every financial instrument tied to his social security number. Julian's face flushed with a mixture of rage and mounting panic. Chloe pulled her hand away from her perfectly manicured nails, tapping nervously against the linen tablecloth. She watched the man she thought was a millionaire argue desperately with the restaurant manager. Julian yelled that he was a vice president, that his bank would hear about this, and that he would have them all fired. The manager remained polite but firm, demanding immediate payment. In the ultimate display of humiliation, Julian had to ask his new mistress to cover the dinner bill. Chloe reluctantly pulled out her own card, her expression souring as the fantasy of her rich sugar daddy began to evaporate before her very eyes. Fuming and humiliated, Julian stormed out of the restaurant with Chloe trailing silently behind him. He marched toward the valet stand, eager to jump into his gleaming black Porsche and speed away from the embarrassment. He handed his ticket to the valet, snapping at the young man to hurry up. But the valet did not run to fetch the vehicle. Instead, he pointed awkwardly toward the street corner. Julian turned his head and his jaw dropped. A heavy commercial tow truck was currently lifting his beloved Porsche into the air. The bright yellow warning lights of the tow truck flashed mockingly in the dark Atlanta night. Julian sprinted down the sidewalk, waving his arms and screaming at the top of his lungs. He demanded the driver put his car down immediately, threatening massive lawsuits and physical violence. The tow truck driver calmly stepped out of the cab, holding a thick clipboard. "Are you Julian?" the driver asked, checking the paperwork. "Yes, I am Julian, and that is my car," Julian screamed, his face completely purple. "Put it down right now before I call the police." The driver shook his head, completely unfazed by the tantrum. "Actually, sir, this vehicle is the legal property of Apex Holdings. They just revoked your driving privileges due to contract termination. I have the legal repossession order right here, signed and authorized 5 minutes ago. If you interfere with this recovery, I will be the one calling the police." Julian stood completely paralyzed on the sidewalk. The cold November wind whipped through his unbuttoned jacket. He watched helplessly as the tow truck secured his ultimate status symbol and drove off into the busy city traffic. He had no money, no credit, and now no transportation. Chloe stood a few feet away, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The disgust on her face was absolutely undeniable. She realized she had not stolen a powerful executive from a pathetic wife. She had tethered herself to a broke, fraudulent failure who was systematically losing his entire world right in front of her very eyes without any chance of ever getting it back. The Maybach smoothly pulled away from the downtown core, leaving Julian and his crumbling facade far behind in the rearview mirror. We glided onto the private ramp beneath the towering glass monolith that dominated the Atlanta skyline. This was the Vanguard Apex headquarters, my actual home. The heavy steel garage doors rolled open automatically, recognizing the encrypted signal from my vehicle. As the car parked in my designated executive bay, the suffocating disguise of the obedient, struggling wife finally peeled away completely. I stepped out into the cavernous, brilliantly lit underground facility. A team of elite security personnel stood at attention, nodding respectfully as I passed. I walked to the private executive elevator, pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner, and selected the penthouse level. The high-speed ascent mirrored the rapid shift in my mindset. For 4 years I had shrunk myself to fit into Julian's narrow, pathetic worldview. Now, I was expanding back into my true form. The elevator doors chimed and slid open to reveal the nerve center of a financial empire. The top floor of Vanguard Apex was a masterpiece of modern architecture, featuring polished obsidian floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding panoramic view of the entire city. My mother Evelyn was already seated at the massive marble conference table, sipping a glass of rare scotch. Beside her stood David, my chief operating officer and the most ruthlessly efficient tactician in the corporate world. He handed me a sleek tablet as I walked into my sprawling corner office. The screen displayed the real-time financial collapse of Julian's life numbers, ticking down to 0. I tossed my coat over a custom leather chair and walked right to the glass, looking down at the glittering streetlights below. I was the apex predator of this city, and the prey had just voluntarily walked into my cage. The repossession went smoothly, David reported, his voice crisp and devoid of unnecessary emotion. His credit lines are locked, his checking accounts are frozen pending a sudden fraud investigation, and his corporate access cards have been flagged. By tomorrow morning, he will not even be able to buy a cup of coffee. I nodded slowly, staring at my reflection in the dark glass. I had built Vanguard Apex with my mother from the ground up, turning a formidable family fortune into an unstoppable private equity juggernaut. I had engineered takeovers that made Wall Street veterans sweat. Yet I had genuinely wanted a normal life. I had wanted a partner who loved me for my mind and my heart, not my bank accounts. Julian had seemed ambitious and kind when we met. It was a flawless deception. He only loved the idea of having someone he could control, someone he could step on to elevate himself. He mistook my intentional modesty for weakness. I turned away from the window and placed my hands flat on the cold marble desk. "We are not just going to ruin his weekend," I stated, my voice echoing in the large room. "We are going to dismantle his entire existence brick by brick." David pulled up the active investment files for Julian's employer, Sterling Financial. David tapped his tablet, projecting the financial data onto the large wall monitor. Sterling Financial was a mid-tier firm desperately trying to stay afloat in a highly competitive market. They were currently begging for a massive capital injection to avoid insolvency. "They have a pitch meeting scheduled with our acquisitions team next week," David noted. "They are asking for a $5 million lifeline." I smiled sharply. "Move that meeting up to this Thursday. Inform their CEO that Vanguard Apex is highly interested, but we require their newly promoted Vice President Julian to lead the pitch. Make them believe he is the key to securing our funding." Evelyn swirled the scotch in her glass, a proud, calculating gleam in her eyes. "You are going to make him dance for his supper," she observed astutely. I nodded. "I am going to make him put his entire career on the line. I want his bosses to think Julian is their savior. When he walks into that boardroom, he will be desperate to impress the faceless executives of Vanguard. We will let him pitch, we will let him sweat, and then we will demand collateral that he cannot possibly provide. We will squeeze him until he cracks under the pressure of his own arrogance." My focus then shifted to the other major player in tonight's theatrical betrayal. "Now let us talk about Victoria and my charming brother-in-law," I said, pulling up another file on the monitor. Victoria loved to flaunt her prestigious ancestry and sneer at anyone she deemed beneath her social class. But old money meant nothing when the liquid assets were entirely gone. David, what is the exact status of Victoria's family estate? David pulled up the records instantly. They are leveraged to the absolute limit. 3 subprime mortgages on the Buckhead property alone. Her father's import business has defaulted on 4 commercial loans in the last fiscal quarter. They have been shuffling debt between shell companies to maintain appearances, but the house of cards is incredibly fragile. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the marble desk, mapping out the kill shot. Buy their debt, I commanded. Every single mortgage, every commercial loan, every line of credit her family owes. I want Vanguard Apex to be their sole creditor by tomorrow afternoon. Pay a premium to the current lenders if you have to just acquire the paper. David nodded, his fingers flying across his tablet as he executed the orders in real time. Once we own the debt, I continued, we will immediately flag their accounts for high-risk review, accelerate the payment schedules based on the hidden default clauses in their original contracts. I want Victoria to wake up to a barrage of foreclosure warnings. She wanted to mock my financial status. I am going to show her what true financial ruin actually looks like. The plan was set. It was not driven by blind emotional rage, but by cold, surgical precision. Julian and Victoria had relied on a false sense of superiority to justify their cruelty. I was going to strip away the counterfeit foundation they stood on. Make sure no one connects Vanguard Apex directly to me yet, I instructed David. Maintain the corporate veil. They need to feel the walls closing in from all sides before they realize who is actually controlling the room. I want them to desperately seek salvation from the very company they insulted. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and walked back to the massive windows. The city lights of Atlanta sparkled like crushed diamonds scattered across a black velvet canvas. Somewhere out there in the dark, Julian was frantically trying to figure out why his plastic cards no longer worked. Somewhere else, Victoria was sleeping soundly in a mansion she no longer truly owned. They had completely underestimated the quiet, unassuming woman in the corner. Tomorrow morning, the sun would rise on a completely different world for them. The hunt had officially begun, and I was going to enjoy every single second of their spectacular collapse. The sun breached the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows across the luxury downtown apartment Julian had foolishly promised his new mistress. He woke up with a pounding headache and a sudden sharp realization that his nightmare at the restaurant was not just a temporary glitch. He rolled out of the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets and grabbed his phone from the nightstand. He frantically opened his banking app, praying that the frozen status from the previous night had been miraculously resolved. Instead, a glaring red error message filled the screen, indicating that his primary checking savings and even his emergency credit lines were locked out. He swiped to his email, hoping for a message from his corporate human resources department explaining the mix-up. What he found was a barrage of automated alerts from every financial institution he had ever dealt with in his entire life. His massive student loans, which he thought were on an automatic payment schedule, were flagged for immediate default. The lease agreement for the downtown condo, which he had signed just 3 days ago, using his new vice president title, had been abruptly canceled due to a failed background financial check. Julian paced the hardwood floor, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Chloe stirred in the bed behind him, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. She asked him if he had managed to get his car back from the towing company. Julian snapped at her to be quiet, his carefully curated mask of the wealthy executive cracking under the immense pressure. He realized with horrifying clarity that he could not even afford to buy her a cup of coffee, let alone fund the lavish lifestyle he had promised. He was a man standing on a trapdoor, and someone had just pulled the lever. While Julian was suffocating under the weight of his sudden financial ruin, Victoria was across town channeling her humiliation into a vicious, unhinged rage. She sat in the opulent solarium of her Buckhead mansion, glaring out the window at the mangled remains of her custom iron gate. The sheer embarrassment of having a fleet of tactical vehicles crash her prestigious Thanksgiving dinner was eating her alive. Her friends had texted her all morning, probing for details, smelling the blood in the water. Victoria knew she had to control the narrative before the society gossips branded her family a laughingstock. She grabbed her smartphone, her manicured fingers trembling with fury, and opened her social media account. She had over 50,000 followers, a curated audience of Atlanta's elite who consumed her every post. Victoria uploaded a picture of her destroyed gate, followed by a lengthy, venomous caption. She painted a completely fabricated story of the previous night. She claimed that her brother-in-law's ex-wife, a deranged and deeply broke freelance typist named Kendra, had suffered a psychotic break. Victoria wrote that I had hired violent street thugs, using high-interest payday loans, to attack her property out of sheer jealousy. She detailed how I was a gold digger, who had dragged Julian down for years and could not handle being replaced by a much younger, more successful woman. She used hashtags attacking my character, and specifically tagged the finance firm where Julian worked, attempting to publicly validate his decision to leave me. She tapped the share button with a triumphant smirk, convinced she had just ruined my reputation in the city permanently. Back in my penthouse office at Vanguard Apex, I sat comfortably at my marble desk, sipping a fresh espresso. David walked into the room holding his tablet with a slight amused grin on his normally stoic face. He placed the device directly in front of me. The screen displayed Victoria's frantic, slanderous post, which was already racking up hundreds of likes and shocked comments from Atlanta's high society. I read through the vicious lies, noting how she had meticulously tried to frame me as a desperate, violent peasant. She genuinely believed she held the power of public perception. She thought social media was her ultimate weapon against a woman she still assumed had zero resources to fight back. She posted this 20 minutes ago, David informed me, his voice carrying a note of professional disdain. It is gaining traction in several affluent circles. Shall I have our cyber division scrub it from the platform right now? I shook my head, taking another calm sip of my espresso. Absolutely not. Let her keep it up. Let her spread her little lies to every country club wife and corporate executive on her follower list. The higher she climbs on her pedestal of fabricated victimhood, the harder she is going to shatter when she hits the concrete. She wants to play a public game of reputation destruction. She just brought a plastic knife to a nuclear war. I stood up and walked around the desk, my mind already calculating the precise legal and financial trajectory of my retaliation. Victoria had just handed me the perfect, undeniable grounds for a massive defamation strike. She had publicly tagged Julian's corporate firm, linking her slander directly to commercial entities. It was a remarkably stupid move driven by raw emotion rather than strategic logic. Draft a formal preservation of evidence order, I instructed David, my tone shifting to absolute business. Capture every single comment, every like, and every share that post receives. I want an airtight digital chain of custody. Understood, David replied, his fingers moving rapidly across his screen. And what is the next phase for her? I looked down at the tablet, staring at Victoria's smug profile picture. We are going to crush her in the one arena she cares about more than her own breathing. We are going to obliterate her social standing and her wallet simultaneously. Call our lead corporate litigation counsel immediately. Tell them to prepare the heaviest, most aggressive cease and desist lawsuit they have ever drafted in the history of this firm. Make sure it hits her inbox before noon today. David smirked widely. I will have the legal team dispatch the documents via private courier. David confirmed, already drafting the urgent directive on his tablet. She will be served before she even finishes her morning mimosa. I nodded, turning my attention back to the broader financial web we were weaving. Victoria had thrived on the illusion of untouchability, believing her family name provided a permanent shield against consequences. She was about to learn that her fake legacy meant nothing against superior capital. Across town, Victoria was indeed enjoying a lavish brunch at an exclusive Buckhead country club. She sat on the sunlit patio, surrounded by three of her most influential socialite friends. She was holding court, loudly recounting her fabricated version of the Thanksgiving disaster. She embellished every detail, portraying me as a hysterical maniac who ruined her perfect holiday out of sheer jealousy. Victoria basked in their attention, checking her phone repeatedly to watch the engagement metrics climb. She felt utterly invincible. That feeling evaporated the moment a man in a sharp gray suit approached their secluded table. He carried a thick, sealed manila envelope. The country club management usually prevented unapproved individuals from accessing the patio, but the man had bypassed them with a flash of elite credentials that demanded immediate compliance. "Victoria Sterling," the man asked, his voice cutting through the polite chatter. Victoria turned around, an annoyed scowl twisting her features. She hated being interrupted. "Yes, I am Victoria. Who are you, and how did you get past the maitre d'?" "You have been served," the man stated flatly. He dropped the heavy envelope directly onto her plate, right on top of her half-eaten eggs. Benedict and turned to walk away immediately. The table went dead silent. Her friends stared at the thick envelope with wide, shocked eyes. Victoria snatched the package with trembling hands, her manicured nails tearing at the seal. She pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. As her eyes scanned the bold text on the first page, featuring a feared litigation firm logo, the blood drained from her face. It was not a standard cease and desist order. It was an aggressive, fast-tracked lawsuit for defamation and tortious interference with business relations. The plaintiff was Vanguard Apex, suing on behalf of its chief executive officer. The damages sought were clearly printed at the bottom in unforgiving ink: $5 million payable immediately. The documents meticulously cited her social media posts, noting that her explicit tagging of corporate entities had elevated her petty slander into a calculated attack on a multi-billion-dollar financial institution. "Victoria, what is it?" one of her friends asked with morbid curiosity. Victoria could not speak. The legal papers explicitly detailed her family's hidden financial ruin, outlining the exact commercial defaults Vanguard Apex was currently acquiring. Panic seized her chest. She grabbed her designer purse and sprinted away from the table, leaving her bewildered friends behind. She dialed Julian's number frantically as she ran toward the parking lot, desperate for someone to fix the catastrophic mistake she had just made. Julian, however, was in no position to rescue anyone. He was sitting in his glass-walled office at Sterling Financial, sweating profusely through his expensive shirt. His morning had been an absolute nightmare. He had tried to use his corporate expense account to pay for a taxi, only to have that card declined as well. He was terrified someone would discover he was entirely cut off from his money. His phone buzzed with Victoria's incoming call, but he actively ignored it. His desk phone rang immediately afterward. It was the executive secretary demanding his presence in the boardroom. Julian stood up, wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers. He plastered a fake, confident smile on his face and marched down the hallway, pushing open the heavy oak doors to step inside. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating. The chief executive officer sat at the head of the table with his head buried in his hands. 3 other senior partners looked equally devastated, staring blankly at the financial charts displayed on the projector screen. The graphs were a sea of steep, terrifying red lines pointing directly toward the bottom of the axis. "Have a seat, Julian," the executive ordered, his voice devoid of its usual authority. "We are facing a critical emergency." Julian sat down carefully, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What is going on? Did a major client pull out?" "Worse," the older man replied with exhausted eyes. "We are drowning. Our liquidity is completely gone. 2 of our largest institutional investors just called in their capital, citing sudden instability. We have exactly 1 week before we fail to meet margin calls. If we do not secure a massive capital injection by this Thursday, Sterling Financial will be forced to file for bankruptcy. Every single person in this building will lose their job, their pensions, and their professional reputations." Julian felt the room spin. The promotion he had bragged about, the status he thought gave him the right to discard his wife, was tied to a sinking ship. He had thrown away a marriage for a title at a company days away from annihilation. "But there is a chance," the executive continued with desperate intensity. "Vanguard Apex just reached out. They are the biggest private equity shark on the East Coast, and they want to hear our pitch to provide a $5 million lifeline." Julian swallowed hard. "That is incredible news. We need to secure that meeting." "The meeting is already set for Thursday," the executive stated, locking his gaze directly onto Julian. "And Vanguard made one very strange demand. They absolutely refused to meet with any senior partners. They specifically requested you. They want you, our newest vice president, to lead the pitch and negotiate the terms of our survival. If you fail to secure this funding, Julian, this entire firm burns to the ground and your career goes up in flames with it." The sheer gravity of the ultimatum hung heavily in the stale air of the boardroom. Julian stared at his terrified superiors, feeling a sickening mixture of absolute dread and intoxicating ego. They were begging him to be their savior. The firm was bleeding out, yet they believed his new vice president title held enough weight to impress the ruthless titans at Vanguard Apex. He swallowed his rising panic and forced a confident, arrogant smirk onto his face. He adjusted his collar and promised to secure the $5 million lifeline without breaking a sweat. He marched out of the room, desperately clinging to the delusion that his business acumen could magically erase his catastrophic financial reality. However, Julian knew the grim truth about Sterling Financial. The primary reason the firm was facing immediate insolvency was its massive portfolio of toxic, underperforming commercial loans. The largest anchor dragging them down was a series of massive real estate debts belonging to Harrison Victoria's arrogant father. Harrison's luxury import business and commercial properties were hemorrhaging cash. Julian realized that to convince Vanguard Apex to bail out the firm, he needed to prove that the underlying assets were salvageable. He needed Harrison to co-sign the pitch to stand beside him in that boardroom and present a united wealthy front to the private equity sharks. Julian left and hailed a cab, wincing at the indignity of riding in the back of a stained sedan instead of his repossessed Porsche. He directed the driver toward Harrison's estate in the affluent northern suburbs. He spent the ride rehearsing his pitch, twisting the narrative to make himself sound like a brilliant strategist, rather than a broke man clinging to the edge of a cliff. Inside the grand estate, the atmosphere was downright apocalyptic. Harrison was pacing across his mahogany library, his desk buried under a mountain of foreclosure warnings and default notices. Vanguard Apex had acquired all of his debt overnight and immediately accelerated the repayment schedules. Victoria was sitting on a leather sofa nearby, clutching her phone with trembling hands. She was still reeling from the $5 million defamation lawsuit she had been served at the country club. Her carefully curated social media empire was in ashes, and her wealthy friends had abandoned her the moment the legal papers hit the table. Julian barged into the library, projecting a fabricated aura of supreme confidence. He quickly outlined his plan to his panicked in-laws. He framed the upcoming Vanguard Apex meeting not as a desperate plea for survival, but as a corporate merger. He lied effortlessly, claiming that Vanguard had specifically requested his expertise. If Harrison would join him in the pitch and present his commercial properties as investments, Julian promised that Sterling Financial would restructure all of Harrison's debt the second the $5 million Vanguard bailout cleared their accounts. It was a spectacular house of cards built entirely on mutual deception. Harrison, blinded by his own towering ego and crushing desperation, agreed immediately. He desperately needed to believe that his old money lineage still carried immense weight in the modern corporate landscape. He eagerly packed his leather briefcase with outdated, overly optimistic financial projections, completely oblivious to the fact that Vanguard Apex already owned every single piece of his failing infrastructure. The sheer arrogance required to walk into a meeting with fabricated numbers was staggering, but he had spent his entire life operating under the assumption that he was utterly untouchable. Thursday morning arrived with a cold, biting wind. Julian and Harrison stood together on the immaculate sidewalk outside the towering glass monolith of Vanguard Apex headquarters. The building was an imposing masterpiece of modern architecture, its dark, reflective windows soaring high into the clouds. It was a fortress of untouchable wealth. Julian smoothed the lapels of his tailored suit, silently hyping himself up. He looked at Harrison, who was adjusting his expensive silk tie. They exchanged a confident, arrogant nod. They believed they were apex predators walking into a standard business negotiation. They had no idea they were just blind cattle wandering willingly into a slaughterhouse. They pushed through the heavy revolving doors and stepped into the cavernous lobby. The sheer scale of the operation was intimidating. Elite security personnel monitored the perimeter with military precision. The polished obsidian floors gleamed under the custom lighting fixtures. Julian pushed his chest out, refusing to let the environment crack his fragile superiority complex. He marched directly toward the sprawling reception desk, fully prepared to throw his newly acquired vice president title around to command immediate respect from the support staff. Julian and Harrison here for the 10 o'clock acquisition pitch, Julian announced to the receptionist, leaning against the marble counter with a practiced, smug smile. We are expected by the senior investment team. The receptionist did not smile back. She treated them with cold efficiency, typing their names into her terminal without looking up. She printed 2 temporary visitor badges and slid them across the sleek counter. She pointed a manicured finger toward a designated bank of private elevators tucked away in a secure corner of the lobby. She instructed them to head directly to the 42nd floor, where the executive acquisitions team was waiting. Julian pinned the badge to his lapel, feeling a massive surge of triumph. He thought he had already won half the battle just by crossing the threshold of the building. He and Harrison walked into the elevator, watching the heavy steel doors slide shut. The high-speed ascent made their stomachs drop, but the physical sensation only fueled their adrenaline. Julian rehearsed his opening lines one final time in his head. The elevator chimed softly, signaling their arrival at the floor. The doors slid open, revealing a sleek, intimidating waiting area designed to make executives sweat. They stepped out onto the plush carpet, unaware that the ruthless chief executive they were about to beg for financial mercy was the same woman they had discarded like worthless garbage just a few days ago. Julian adjusted his silk tie as a severe executive assistant approached. She offered no warm greeting or coffee. She simply gestured toward towering frosted glass doors at the end of the corridor. Julian and Harrison followed in silence, their footsteps muffled by thick carpet. When the doors swung open, they stepped into the most intimidating boardroom Julian had ever seen. A massive table carved from a single slab of black marble dominated the space. But the most striking feature was the entire back wall. It was not a window overlooking the Atlanta skyline. It was a massive, seamless two-way mirror reflecting their own anxious faces back at them. Julian took a seat, gesturing for Harrison to sit beside him. They unpacked briefcases, laying out manipulated financial dossiers and colorful pitch decks designed to hide massive insolvency. Julian wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. The room was perfectly climate-controlled, yet he felt like he was sitting inside an oven. He checked his luxury watch rented for the day just to keep up appearances. On the other side of that mirror, I sat in absolute comfort. The two-way glass gave me a perfect, unobstructed view of their pathetic desperation. I rested my elbows on a sleek desk in my private viewing room, sipping chilled, sparkling water. David stood right beside me, holding a tablet containing their actual catastrophic financial records. We watched Julian shuffle his papers, his hands trembling slightly. He looked exactly like a cornered animal trying to project the illusion of a predator. Harrison looked even worse. The older man kept pulling at his collar, breathing heavily, completely unaware that the empire he was about to brag about already belonged to me. "Look at them," I said quietly, my voice echoing in the small soundproof room. "They genuinely believe they are going to outsmart us. They think they can walk in here with fabricated numbers and walk out with $5 million. David let out a low, mocking chuckle. Julian's heart rate must be through the roof. Shall I go in and let them begin their performance? Yes, I commanded. Do not give them an inch, David. Tear apart their projections. Make them defend every single lie. I want to see them sweat through their tailored suits before we drop the anvil. David nodded and exited my viewing room. Through the glass, I watched the frosted boardroom doors open. David walked in carrying nothing but a single thin manila folder. He did not introduce himself. He did not shake their hands. He simply sat down at the head of the marble table, staring at them with eyes like frozen steel. Julian immediately launched into his rehearsed routine. He stood up, projecting a fake, booming confidence. He talked about Sterling Financial as if it were a juggernaut of industry, claiming that their slight liquidity issue was just a minor hurdle in an otherwise explosive growth trajectory. He pointed to his colorful charts, aggressively selling the illusion. We are offering Vanguard Apex a rare opportunity to enter a highly lucrative partnership, Julian declared, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. Sterling Financial holds a diverse portfolio of premium commercial real estate assets. My father-in-law here, Harrison, represents our strongest client. His luxury import business and commercial properties are valued at over $20 million. A $5 million injection from your firm will allow us to scale operations globally. David did not look at the charts. He did not look at the pitch deck. He slowly opened his manila folder and pulled out a single sheet of crisp white paper. Your presentation is very colorful, Julian, David stated, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. But it is completely fiction. Sterling Financial is not experiencing a minor liquidity hurdle. You are facing imminent bankruptcy by next Tuesday. Your two largest institutional investors have already fled. And as for your strongest client, Harrison, his luxury import business has defaulted on 4 commercial loans in the last quarter alone. Harrison gasped loudly, gripping the edge of the marble table. His face turned an alarming shade of gray. Julian froze, his mouth hanging open in pure shock. He looked frantically at his father-in-law, then back at David. I do not know where you got that information, Julian stammered, his confident facade shattering instantly. But our assets are rock solid. Harrison's estate alone in Buckhead is a historic property worth millions. Behind the glass, I smiled. It was almost too easy. They were walking right into the center of the trap. Your numbers are outdated and your leverage is entirely non-existent, David countered relentlessly. He slid a copy of their actual debt profile across the table. You are begging us for $5 million to plug a hole in a sinking ship. Why should Vanguard Apex throw capital into a firm that manages toxic debt? Julian was hyperventilating now. He realized that the executives at Vanguard knew more about his company than his own chief executive officer did. He dropped into his chair, running his hands through his hair. He looked at the mirror, completely unaware he was staring directly into my eyes. Please, Julian begged, abandoning all pretense of corporate negotiation. His voice whined with pathetic desperation. We have the infrastructure. We just need the capital. We will give you unprecedented equity. We will give you whatever terms you want. If I do not walk out of here with an agreement, Sterling Financial is finished and my career is over. David leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. The trap was set. Vanguard Apex does not do charity, Julian, David said coldly. We specialize in distressed asset acquisition. We require absolute collateral today. Harrison will sign over the deed to his Buckhead mansion as a personal guarantee against the $5 million corporate loan. If you default, Vanguard takes the historic property immediately. It is our only offer. Sign the document right now or we walk away forever. Gentlemen. Harrison recoiled as if he had been physically struck. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly gray. The Buckhead mansion was the absolute crown jewel of his curated aristocratic persona. It was the sole physical proof of his family's generational wealth, even if that wealth was suffocating under hidden liabilities. To risk the historic estate was unthinkable, a desperate gamble against every instinct of self-preservation he possessed. You cannot be serious, Harrison stammered, his voice trembling with genuine terror. He looked at the legal contract David had slid across the marble table. That property has been in my family for decades. I am not putting my daughter's inheritance on the line for a corporate bailout. David did not blink. He slowly checked his platinum watch, radiating absolute boredom. Vanguard Apex assesses risk differently than you do, Harrison. We are offering a $5 million lifeline to save a sinking corporate entity. In exchange, we require collateral holding tangible market value. Your business loans are toxic. The Buckhead estate is the only clean asset you have left. I suggest you sign the document, or I will end this meeting right now, and you can explain your bankruptcy to a federal judge next week. Julian felt the walls closing in on him. If Harrison refused to sign, Sterling Financial would collapse. Julian would lose his vice president title, his salary, and whatever shred of dignity he possessed. He would be exposed as a fraud to Chloe, his brother, and the entire city. He needed this victory, no matter who he had to sacrifice. He turned to his father-in-law, his eyes wild with predatory desperation. He leaned close, lowering his voice into a harsh whisper. Listen to me carefully, Harrison, Julian hissed. This is not a risk. It is a temporary bridge. Once that $5 million hits Sterling Financial, I will personally authorize the restructuring of all your failing commercial debts. The company will thrive, your businesses will recover, and the mansion will be perfectly safe. It is just a formality. From the darkness of the observation room, I watched the pathetic display unfold. Julian was using the exact same psychological tactics he had deployed against me for 4 years. He was gaslighting Harrison, minimizing the massive risk while promising a fabricated salvation. Julian had absolutely no authority to restructure commercial debt, and $5 million was not nearly enough to save them both. He was openly lying to throw his wife's family under the bus. Harrison shook his head, gripping the armrests tightly. If Victoria finds out I leveraged the house, she will never forgive me. I cannot do it, Julian. The optics are terrible. We need to find another investor. We need more time. We do not have more time, Julian snapped, abandoning all pretense of respect for his elder. He grabbed the expensive pen from the table and shoved it into Harrison's trembling hand. There are no other investors. Every major bank has already rejected your applications. If you do not sign this paper, Victoria will be homeless. She will pack her designer bags and move into a cheap apartment because your entire empire will be liquidated. Do you want your daughter to be a public laughingstock? The threat of public humiliation was the ultimate weapon against a man like Harrison. The thought of losing his social standing and facing his wealthy peers as a bankrupt failure was far more terrifying than the legal jargon on the contract. He stared at the signature line, sweating profusely. 10 seconds, David announced coldly, tapping his pen against the table. My time is extremely valuable, gentlemen. Decide your fate. Harrison squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a ragged, defeated breath. He pressed the tip of the pen to the paper and signed his name with a jagged, shaky stroke. He had officially pledged the historic Buckhead estate as a personal guarantee. Julian snatched the document instantly, his face breaking into a victorious grin. He scrawled his own signature, sealing the deal. Excellent decision! Julian beamed, sliding the contract back toward David. He straightened his jacket, his chest puffing out with unwarranted arrogance. I assure you, Vanguard Apex will not regret this partnership. Sterling Financial is going to provide unprecedented returns on this investment. David picked up the contract, carefully placing it into his manila folder. He stood up, towering over the two men. Vanguard Apex never regrets an acquisition, David stated, his voice completely devoid of collaborative warmth. The funds will transfer according to the strict terms of this agreement. Any deviation from the payment schedule will trigger an immediate default. Good day, gentlemen. David turned and walked out of the boardroom without looking back. Julian let out a massive sigh of relief, slapping a traumatized Harrison on the back. Julian genuinely believed he had just orchestrated the business deal of the century. He thought he had outsmarted the ruthless private equity sharks. He strutted out of the room, completely oblivious to his fatal error. Inside my observation room, I pressed my hand against the cool glass of the two-way mirror. A dark, deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had utterly crushed them. Julian and Harrison did not read the fine print. They had no idea Vanguard Apex already purchased the underlying debt of their existing properties. By signing a new collateral agreement with the exact same creditor, they unknowingly triggered an automatic cross-default clause. The $5 million would technically transfer to Sterling Financial, but they would never spend a single dime of that cash. The funds would be instantly seized by our automated collection algorithms the very second they hit the account. Julian had not saved his company or his father-in-law. He had just handed me the keys to Victoria's precious Buckhead mansion on a gleaming silver platter. The corporate slaughter was now officially complete, and it was finally time to serve the heavy main course today. Julian strode out of the towering Vanguard Apex building with the swagger of a conquering general. The crisp November air felt invigorating against his flushed face. He pulled his phone from his pocket and immediately called Victoria, completely ignoring the fact that he was standing on the bustling sidewalk in broad daylight. When she answered, her voice was tight with lingering anxiety from the defamation lawsuit she had received just days prior. Julian did not offer comfort. He offered a victory lap. He loudly boasted that he had completely saved Sterling Financial and rescued her family's precious estate in a single brilliant stroke of corporate negotiation. He promised her that the $5 million would be wired by the end of the week, effectively erasing all their debt problems. Victoria let out a dramatic shriek of joy, her previous panic instantly dissolving into arrogant relief. She praised Julian, assuring him that he was the true visionary of the family. Returning to his office, Julian was greeted as a hero. The senior partners, who had been sweating through their tailored suits just hours earlier, actually stood up and applauded when he entered the boardroom. They patted him on the back, offering him expensive cigars and promising a massive quarterly bonus once the Vanguard funds cleared. Julian soaked up the adoration like a sponge. He firmly believed his silver tongue had outmaneuvered the most ruthless private equity firm on the East Coast. He texted Chloe instructing her to start looking at penthouse condominiums because his promotion was now permanently secured. He felt entirely untouchable. 2 days later, a specialized private courier arrived at Victoria's Buckhead mansion, requiring a direct signature. The delivery consisted of 3 heavy black velvet boxes. Inside each box rested a thick gold-embossed invitation card. The elegant script cordially invited Julian, Chloe, and Victoria to the Vanguard Apex annual winter gala. The event was legendary within Atlanta's high society, an ultra-exclusive gathering where the city's billionaires, political elite, and corporate titans mingled behind closed doors. Receiving an invitation was the ultimate validation of social supremacy. For Victoria, it was proof that her family had not only survived their financial crisis, but had officially ascended to the absolute highest tier of wealth. Victoria shrieked with genuine delight, running her manicured fingers over the raised gold lettering. She immediately took photos of the luxurious invitation, carefully cropping out her own name to build suspense, and posted them to her new private social media account. She completely disregarded the looming $5 million defamation lawsuit, assuming that Julian's new partnership with Vanguard would easily squash any petty legal threats from a bitter ex-wife. In her mind, Vanguard Apex was now their corporate ally. She firmly believed the lawsuit was just a bureaucratic error that would be tossed out the moment she rubbed shoulders with the firm's executives at the gala. Driven by pure, unrestrained arrogance, Victoria embarked on a reckless spending spree. She ignored the mountain of final notice bills stacked on her father's mahogany desk. Instead, she took her maxed-out credit cards, which were temporarily operational due to a frantic last-minute balance transfer her father had illegally authorized, and marched straight into the city's most exclusive designer boutiques. She purchased a stunning custom-fitted emerald gown that cost more than a luxury sedan. She demanded VIP treatment from the retail staff, scoffing at anyone who did not immediately recognize her fabricated status. She booked a team of professional makeup artists and hairstylists, demanding they arrive at her estate hours before the event to ensure she looked absolutely flawless. Julian was equally infected by this toxic surge of overconfidence. He took Chloe to a high-end jeweler using a risky corporate advance he had bullied his firm into providing. He purchased a dazzling diamond necklace for his mistress, a blatant middle finger to the frugal life he had lived with me. He wanted Chloe to drip with visible wealth when they walked the red carpet at the gala. He practiced his handshake in the mirror, rehearsing the charming anecdotes he planned to share with Vanguard's senior partners. He envisioned himself being offered a lucrative position at the private equity firm, assuming his brilliant pitch had caught the attention of their mysterious chief executive officer. The evening of the gala arrived, blanketing the city in a cold, crisp twilight. Inside the Buckhead mansion, the atmosphere was chaotic and electric. Victoria stood in front of a massive gilded mirror, admiring her emerald gown and the sparkling jewels wrapped around her neck. She looked exactly like the wealthy aristocrat she desperately pretended to be. Chloe adjusted the diamond necklace Julian had purchased, giggling as he wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. Julian wore a newly tailored tuxedo, his chest puffed out with undeniable pride. They shared a toast with expensive champagne, clinking their crystal glasses together in celebration of their supposed triumph. "Can you imagine what Kendra is doing right now?" Victoria mocked, taking a slow sip of her drink. "She is probably sitting in a cheap motel room, eating microwave dinners, crying over those divorce papers. She actually thought she could threaten us with her little rented cars. Meanwhile, we are about to drink top-shelf champagne with the billionaires who run this city. It is almost too poetic." "She was a parasite," Julian agreed smoothly, adjusting his bow tie. "I dragged her dead weight around for 4 years. Tonight is about the future. It is about claiming our rightful place at the absolute top of the food chain." When we walk into that ballroom tonight, everyone will know that we are the elite. We are untouchable. They finished their expensive drinks and proudly walked out to the massive waiting limousine they rented for the occasion. They did not notice the strange unmarked sedan parked casually down the dark street, monitoring their every move. They climbed into the back, laughing and boasting, completely oblivious to their impending destruction. The stretched limousine rolled to a smooth halt before the towering, brilliantly illuminated entrance of the Vanguard Apex Winter Gala. Sweeping searchlights cut across the dark night sky, and a massive red carpet led up the grand marble stairs. Julian stepped out first, buttoning his tuxedo jacket. He tossed a crumpled $5 bill directly onto the cold pavement, completely ignoring the valet who scrambled to collect it. Victoria followed, her emerald gown dragging slightly on the pristine carpet. Chloe trailed behind, clinging tightly to Julian's left arm. As they approached the massive glass doors, a uniformed security attendant politely asked to see their invitations. Victoria snatched the gold-embossed card from her clutch and shoved it against the attendant's chest. She complained about the indignity of being stopped at the entrance, claiming her family name should have granted her unquestioned access. The attendant maintained perfect composure, verified their credentials, and unclipped the velvet rope. Julian smirked, feeling a rush of superiority as they crossed the threshold into the grand ballroom. The interior was a breathtaking display of capital. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the city's financial elite. Waiters in white tuxedos glided through the dense crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with caviar and glasses of champagne. Julian's eyes widened with sheer greed. He saw regional politicians, real estate tycoons, and billionaires mingling casually near the ice sculptures. This was the room he had dreamed of standing in his life. "This is it," Julian whispered to Chloe, his grip tightening excitedly on her waist. "This is exactly where we belong. Stick close to me, smile at everyone, and let me do all the talking. I am personally securing our incredibly wealthy future tonight." Victoria immediately hailed a passing waiter, aggressively snapping her manicured fingers just inches from his face. She took a delicate glass of champagne, took a tiny sip, and dramatically spit it right back into the flute. She shoved the glass back onto the silver tray with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. She loudly berated the young man, claiming the champagne was unacceptably warm and demanding he fetch a fresh glass from a newly opened bottle. She threatened to have him fired immediately, citing her supposed close personal friendship with the Vanguard Apex event coordinators. The waiter bowed respectfully, apologizing for the terrible inconvenience, and hurried away. Victoria laughed sharply, turning to Julian and Chloe to loudly boast about how you must always treat the working help with an iron fist. They made their way slowly toward the center of the crowded ballroom, desperately trying to insert themselves into ongoing conversations with prominent investors. Julian attempted to shake hands with a renowned banking executive, awkwardly introducing himself as a highly successful vice president. The executive gave him a polite, entirely dismissive nod before completely turning his back. Julian swallowed his rising irritation, deciding he simply required more aggressive charm. Victoria constantly scanned the busy room, searching for a professional photographer to capture her emerald gown. Her eyes swept past the towering floral arrangements, past the classical string quartet, playing softly in the corner, and abruptly stopped moving. Her breath caught sharply in her throat. She blinked rapidly, leaning forward, absolutely certain her eyes were playing a cruel, impossible trick on her in the dim golden lighting. Standing near a cordoned-off, heavily guarded VIP lounge at the far end of the ballroom was a woman. She was not just wearing a dress. She was completely commanding the entire space around her. The gown was a breathtaking, custom-made haute couture masterpiece of midnight blue silk. It cascaded perfectly to the floor, shimmering like liquid sapphire. A delicate, authentic diamond choker rested against her collarbone, and her posture was absolutely flawless. She calmly held a crystal glass, speaking with relaxed authority to two older men who looked like high-ranking corporate board members. Victoria grabbed Julian's shoulder, her long fingernails digging painfully deep into his tuxedo jacket. "Julian!" Victoria hissed, her voice trembling with a chaotic mixture of profound shock and immediate visceral outrage. "Look directly over there, by the ice sculpture. Tell me I am hallucinating." Julian followed her pointing finger. his eyes narrowing sharply as he tried to focus through the dense, moving crowd. When he finally registered the face of the elegant woman in the midnight blue gown, his jaw dropped completely open. Chloe gasped loudly, her hand flying to cover her open mouth. It was me. I stood there calmly sipping my sparkling water, effortlessly projecting the quiet, terrifying authority I had spent years meticulously cultivating. I was completely in my natural element, easily discussing complex global market trends with my senior financial advisors. Kendra! Julian whispered, his brain desperately short-circuiting as it tried to mentally process the impossible image standing right in front of him. What in the world is she doing here? How did she possibly get past the security guards? Victoria's initial shock rapidly morphed into a vicious, deeply comforting delusion. Her mind simply could not accept the reality that the woman she had mocked actually belonged in this room. She snuck in, Victoria declared, her voice rising with sudden malicious excitement. Look at her! That dress is obviously a cheap, pathetic knockoff. She must have found out we were coming tonight and followed us. She probably slipped through the service entrance just to steal free food. Julian sneered, a very cruel smile spreading. You are right. She is desperate. She wants to cause a massive scene to ruin my networking opportunities. Victoria spat. She is an absolute embarrassment. We will humiliate her and then I will call security. Julian nodded enthusiastically, completely blinded by his own towering arrogance. Chloe linked her arm through his, eager to watch the pathetic ex-wife get dragged out of the gala. They marched across the grand ballroom floor, pushing past billionaires and titans of industry, heading directly toward the absolute center of the spiderweb, entirely convinced they were about to deliver the final crushing blow. Julian pushed his way past a group of tech investors, his chest puffed out like a peacock preparing for battle. Victoria followed closely behind him, her emerald dress swishing against the polished marble floor. She held her head high, completely convinced she was about to deliver the ultimate social execution. Chloe clung to Julian's arm, her eyes locked on my midnight blue gown, with a mixture of intense jealousy and fabricated disdain. I watched their aggressive approach from the corner of my eye. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. I turned to the two senior board members standing beside me and politely asked them to excuse me for a moment. I told them a minor pest control issue required my immediate attention. They nodded respectfully and stepped away, leaving me standing alone near the velvet ropes of the VIP lounge. Well, look what the cat dragged in from the alley, Victoria announced loudly. Her shrill voice pierced through the sophisticated hum of the grand ballroom. Several prominent guests standing nearby paused their conversations, turning their heads to observe the sudden commotion. Victoria thrived on the attention. She stepped squarely into my personal space, looking me up and down with exaggerated revulsion. I honestly cannot believe the security at Vanguard Apex is this incredibly sloppy. Did you crawl through the kitchen delivery entrance, Kendra? Or did you bribe a busboy to sneak you in just so you could steal some free appetizers? I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply looked at her with a blank, unreadable expression. Good evening, Victoria. You are wearing a very loud dress. It matches your personality perfectly. Julian stepped forward, inserting himself directly between me and the main ballroom floor. He crossed his arms over his tailored tuxedo, adopting the posture of a disappointed father scolding a rebellious child. This is a new low even for you, Julian sneered, shaking his head. Following me to an exclusive corporate gala, just to beg for my attention, I handed you those divorce papers for a reason. You are completely delusional if you think stalking me at a billionaire networking event will change my mind. You do not belong here. You have never belonged anywhere near this level of society. Chloe giggled softly, pressing her diamond necklace against his shoulder. Julian is right, Kendra. It is honestly just sad at this point. You are making an absolute fool of yourself in front of Atlanta's most important people. That dress looks like a cheap costume you bought at a thrift store. You should really leave before you embarrass yourself any further. I am not here for you, Julian. I said, my voice barely above a whisper yet, carrying a lethal weight that made the air around us turn instantly cold. And I highly suggest you lower your voice. You are standing in a room full of people who actually possess wealth, not just people who pretend to have it by taking out massive bank loans. Victoria gasped, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson. The mention of her hidden financial ruin struck a raw nerve. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. Do not you dare speak to us about wealth, you broke pathetic typist. You are nothing. You are a parasite who lived off my family for 4 years. We are guests of the Vanguard Apex executive team. My family is negotiating a massive corporate merger with this firm. You are trespassing on private property, and I am going to see to it that you are thrown into a prison immediately tonight. The crowd of onlookers had grown significantly. Wealthy socialites and corporate titans watched the spectacle with quiet fascination. Julian, sensing the growing audience, decided it was time to play the commanding executive hero. He wanted to prove his dominance to everyone watching. He raised his hand and forcefully snapped his fingers at a passing waiter. "You!" Julian barked, his voice echoing across the nearest tables. "Go find your head of security immediately. Tell him we have an aggressive trespasser who needs to be physically removed from the premises. Tell him Vice President Julian from Sterling Financial is making the official request." The waiter looked at me, his eyes widening in sudden panic. He gave me a quick deferential bow and rushed off toward the perimeter guards. Julian turned back to me, an ugly, victorious smirk stretching across his face. "You are done, Kendra," Julian whispered, leaning in close so only I could hear the venom in his voice. "I am going to watch them drag you out of here kicking and screaming. Tomorrow morning, every single person in my firm will know that my crazy former wife had to be arrested at the biggest gala of the entire year. I am going to ruin your life so completely that you will never show your face in this city again." "You are certainly welcome to try," I replied smoothly. I took another casual sip of my water, my heart beat perfectly steady. "But you should really look behind you before you make promises you cannot keep." Julian frowned, confused by my absolute lack of fear. He slowly turned his head. Striding purposefully across the marble floor was the head of Vanguard Apex Security. He was a towering, heavily muscled man wearing a pristine tactical suit and a discreet earpiece. 4 massive security guards flanked him, moving with strict, intimidating military precision. The crowd of billionaires parted seamlessly to let them through. Victoria clapped her hands together in sheer delight. "Finally!" she exclaimed, stepping toward the approaching guards. "Officer, thank goodness you are here. This woman snuck into the gala. She has been harassing my family and threatening us. She is mentally unstable and completely broke. I demand that you arrest her and remove her from this building immediately." Julian nodded, a vile grin emerging. "Get this garbage out of my sight right now. I am a very important guest." The towering head of security did not even glance at Julian. He walked straight past Victoria, his broad shoulders easily brushing her aside. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me, planting his polished boots firmly on the marble floor. The 4 massive guards fanned out instantly, forming an impenetrable wall between me and my former family. The ballroom chatter died down to a hushed, anticipating whisper as everyone watched the confrontation unfold. Victoria stamped her foot, her face contorting with impatient rage. She pointed her finger at my face, screaming at the security team. She demanded to know why they were just standing there instead of putting me in handcuffs. Julian stepped forward, puffing out his chest to exert his fabricated authority, ordering the guards to follow his direct commands. He shouted that they were allowing a dangerous trespasser to harass VIP guests. The head of security completely ignored their frantic barking. He placed his hands sharply at his sides, bent at the waist, and executed a flawless, deep bow directly to me. "Is everything secure here, Madam Chairman?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute, unwavering reverence. "Do you require these individuals to be removed from your presence?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was a suffocating, heavy vacuum that sucked the air straight out of Julian and Victoria's lungs. Julian blinked rapidly, his mind desperately trying to process the words. He looked from the bowing security chief to my calm expression, his brain completely short-circuiting. Victoria let out a strangled sound. She grabbed Julian's sleeve, her knuckles turning white as she swayed unsteadily on her expensive heels. "What did you just call her?" Julian stammered, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. His voice trembled, stripping away every ounce of his arrogant facade. "You are making a massive mistake. She is a freelance typist. She is nobody. You work for Vanguard Apex, and my firm is negotiating a $5 million merger with your executives tomorrow morning. I demand you arrest this woman right now. You are ruining my career. The security chief straightened his posture, turning his head slowly to look at Julian. His eyes were devoid of any sympathy, staring at Julian with the cold detachment of a predator observing cornered prey. I do not make mistakes regarding the owner of this building, the security chief stated flatly. And you do not make demands of anyone here. Step back immediately, or I will authorize physical force to secure the perimeter. Before Julian could even attempt to process that devastating reality, the ambient lighting in the grand ballroom began to dim. A brilliant spotlight pierced through the darkness, sweeping across the sea of wealthy guests before landing directly on me. The sudden illumination made my midnight blue gown shimmer brilliantly, the authentic diamonds at my throat reflecting a blinding, undeniable power. Every head in the massive room turned toward the glowing beam of light. On the massive stage at the far end of the room, the master of ceremonies stepped up to the crystal podium. He tapped the microphone, the sharp sound echoing through the cavernous space. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed partners, the MC announced, his booming voice resonating with immense pride. Please direct your attention to the center of the room. It is my absolute honor to introduce the visionary architect of tonight's gathering. She is the founder, the chief executive officer, and the sole chairwoman of Vanguard Apex. Please welcome our host, Miss Kendra. The entire ballroom erupted into deafening applause. Billionaires, politicians, and corporate titans put down their champagne glasses and clapped with genuine respect. The string quartet began playing a triumphant, swelling melody. The elite members of Atlanta's high society turned their bodies toward me, nodding their heads in deep admiration for the woman who controlled the financial heartbeat of the city. The applause washed over the scene, a physical manifestation of total absolute power. Julian stood completely paralyzed. His knees visibly buckled, forcing him to lean heavily against a nearby cocktail table just to stay upright. The color entirely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. The horrifying truth crashed down on him with the weight of a falling skyscraper. He had not married a broke, dependent woman. He had married a titan of industry. He had thrown divorce papers at the very billionaire he was currently begging to save his failing career. He was completely destroyed. Victoria looked like she had just been physically struck. Her jaw hung slack and her manicured hands shook violently. She stared at the cheering crowd of aristocrats, realizing that the woman she had mercilessly mocked, the woman whose heritage she constantly belittled, was the reigning monarch of the exact social tier Victoria had spent her entire life desperately trying to infiltrate. The $5 million defamation lawsuit she had received that morning was not a clerical error. It was a targeted, lethal strike from a predator she foolishly provoked. Chloe whimpered, shrinking away from Julian, as if his sudden failure was highly contagious. She realized in a split second that the man she had stolen was not a wealthy executive on the rise, but a catastrophic liability who had just publicly humiliated the most powerful woman in the room. Her dreams of a penthouse and unlimited credit evaporated, replaced by the terrifying certainty that she was tethered to a sinking stone. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked at them with the cold indifference they truly deserved. I was a queen looking at common thieves who had wandered blindly into my throne room. I turned my back on them, moving gracefully toward the VIP lounge as my security detail closed the gap behind me. I left them frozen in the spotlight of their own spectacular ruin, paralyzed by the terrifying realization of what awaited them in my boardroom tomorrow. The harsh morning sunlight pierced the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Vanguard Apex tower, illuminating the cold reality of the day. The dazzling illusions of the grand gala had officially dissolved, replaced by the terrifying, inescapable demands of corporate execution. Julian, Victoria, and Harrison stood silently in the cavernous lobby, waiting for the private elevator. They looked physically shattered. Julian wore the same crumpled suit from the previous day, his eyes bloodshot from a completely sleepless night of sheer panic. Victoria lacked her usual pristine glamour. Her hands shook violently as she clutched her designer handbag, her face pale and devoid of its arrogant makeup. Harrison leaned heavily on his expensive cane, sweating profusely despite the cool climate control of the massive building. They were trapped. They knew exactly who held the reins of this company now, but they were utterly powerless to run away. Sterling Financial would default in 3 hours, and Victoria's family estate was on the absolute brink of foreclosure. They had to walk directly into the jaws of the predator they had mercilessly mocked because it was the only door left open. The heavy steel doors of the private elevator chimed and slid open. The silent, high-speed ascent to the 42nd floor felt like a funeral march. Julian stared blankly at the metal doors, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The terrifying image of his supposedly broke, worthless wife standing under the spotlight as the chairwoman of a multi-billion-dollar empire looped endlessly in his fractured mind. Every cruel insult, every condescending remark, and every single moment of disrespect he had inflicted upon me over the past 4 years, replayed with agonizing clarity. He had brought his mistress to my family events, threw divorce papers at my feet, and demanded I be thrown out of my own building. He was about to sit across a negotiation table from the very woman he had publicly tried to destroy. The elevator doors opened, and an unsmiling security guard escorted them down the hushed executive corridor. They stepped into the same intimidating boardroom where David had meticulously cornered them just days prior. The massive slab of black marble dominated the center of the room. The two-way mirror covered the entire back wall, a dark reflection of their impending doom. Harrison collapsed into a leather chair, struggling to catch his breath. Victoria sat beside him, staring blankly at the polished surface of the table. Julian took the seat on the opposite side, folding his trembling hands together in a desperate attempt to stop them from shaking. The silence in the massive room was absolute, designed specifically to heighten their psychological torment. Every passing second amplified their suffocating dread. Victoria finally broke the quiet, her voice a fragile, hysterical whisper. She turned to her father, begging him to find another way out, pleading with him to call their offshore accounts or liquidate their remaining assets. Harrison slowly shook his head, his aristocratic pride completely broken. He quietly confessed that there were no offshore accounts left, and that Vanguard Apex had systematically acquired every single ounce of their debt. They were entirely at the mercy of the woman they had treated like dirt. The heavy frosted glass doors at the far end of the boardroom suddenly unlatched with a sharp mechanical click. Julian jumped in his seat. David walked in first, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and his signature expression of absolute indifference. He carried a stack of thick legal dossiers, dropping them onto the marble table with a heavy, resounding thud. He did not offer a greeting. He simply stepped to the side, standing at attention near the head of the table, like a royal guard preparing for the arrival of the monarch. The dread in the room peaked as the door swung wider. I walked into the boardroom. I wore a sharp-structured crimson suit that radiated power and demanded total submission. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished floor, a steady, terrifying countdown to their ultimate destruction. I did not look angry. I did not look vindictive. I looked completely and utterly detached, bringing the cold, clinical precision of a seasoned corporate killer. I walked past Julian without offering him a single glance. I moved past Victoria, entirely ignoring her pathetic, muffled sob. I pulled out the high-backed leather chair at the absolute head of the massive table and sat down, resting my hands comfortably on the cool marble. Julian could barely lift his head. He stared at my hands, his eyes tracing the bare finger where his cheap wedding ring used to sit. Victoria bit her lip, her aristocratic facade entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but a terrified, drowning woman. Harrison wiped his brow with a silk handkerchief, unable to maintain eye contact with the chief executive who had effortlessly outmaneuvered his decades of business experience. They were all completely broken before I even opened my mouth to speak to them today. I looked at the three of them, letting the heavy silence stretch out to maximize their agony. I wanted them to feel the full crushing weight of my authority before I ended their professional and financial lives. I reached forward slowly, opening the first thick dossier David had placed on the table. The crisp sound of the turning page echoed sharply in the quiet room. "Good morning," I stated, my voice smooth, level, and completely devoid of mercy. "I trust you all enjoyed the grand gala last night. The champagne was perfectly chilled, and the entertainment was certainly memorable. However, the social hour has officially concluded. You are sitting in my building, consuming my time and waiting for my capital. We have a great deal of highly sensitive corporate business to finalize this morning, and I do not tolerate delays. David, please distribute the final terms of their complete and unconditional surrender to these three desperate individuals immediately. The absolute total destruction of their pathetic fabricated elite empire begins right here and right now." David slid the top dossier across the smooth marble surface directly toward Julian. The file stopped inches from his trembling hands. Julian stared at the manila cover as if it were an explosive device. He kept his eyes locked on the polished table, breathing shallowly. I locked my gaze onto the man who had thrown divorce papers at me days ago. "Let us begin with you, Julian," I said smoothly. "You walked into this building believing your brilliant negotiation skills would secure a $5 million lifeline to save Sterling Financial. Vanguard Apex never throws life preservers to sinking ships. We buy the ocean." At 8 o'clock this morning, my board finalized the hostile takeover of Sterling Financial. Your former chief executive officer signed the transfer documents an hour ago and resigned. Therefore, I am the owner of the company you work for. Julian's head snapped up in horror. The realization that I was now his boss struck him with physical force. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a finger to silence him. "Open the folder, Julian," I commanded sharply. He hesitated, his hands shaking violently. When he flipped it open, his eyes scanned the top page and the remaining color drained from his face. He let out a choked gasp. "You believed you could maintain a facade of wealth on a modest corporate salary," I continued. "When I froze your credit accounts, I forced you to scramble. But my forensic accounting team dug much deeper into your professional history. We audited every single ledger, client account, and offshore transfer you authorized over the last 18 months. Victoria and Harrison turned to look at Julian, their misery temporarily eclipsed by morbid curiosity. Julian shrank under their gaze, trying to close the folder, but David stepped forward and pinned it open against the table. "You did not just live beyond your means," I stated loudly. "You are a common thief. The documents in front of you outline a highly sophisticated embezzlement scheme. You systematically siphoned $2,400,000 from the highest premium client accounts over the span of 22 months. You funneled that stolen capital through 3 traceable offshore shell companies to fund your leased luxury sports cars, your tailored designer suits, and the expensive diamond necklaces you bought to impress your naive mistress. You stole from the very people who trusted you with their life savings just so you could pretend to be a titan of industry at country club dinners. That is an absolute, complete lie," Julian whispered, his voice cracking violently into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak as he frantically wiped cold sweat from his forehead. "I can explain the transfers. It was a temporary reallocation of funds. I was going to put the money back as soon as my quarterly bonus cleared. You are twisting the financial data to frame me out of pure spite." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh that echoed off the glass walls. "A temporary reallocation of $2 million to a jewelry boutique in Buckhead. That is a fascinating defense strategy, Julian. I am sure the federal prosecutors will find it highly entertaining. Because Vanguard Apex now owns every single asset of Sterling Financial. I have a non-negotiable fiduciary duty to immediately address this massive documented internal corporate theft. Therefore, my first official act as the new owner is to terminate your employment effective immediately. You are officially fired, your benefits are canceled, your remaining stock options are voided, and you are permanently blacklisted from the entire financial sector." Julian gripped his hair, pulling at the roots as the sheer magnitude of his destruction settled over him. He was completely ruined, stripped of his fake prestige, and left with nothing but his own undeniable guilt. But I was not finished. "Termination is merely a corporate formality," I added, my voice dropping to a lethal quiet tone. David, please inform our former vice president where the unredacted copies of that forensic audit are currently located. David adjusted his suit jacket and looked down at Julian with absolute disgust. At 9 o'clock this morning, our legal division submitted the complete evidence package to the regional office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We also filed a massively detailed comprehensive compliance report directly with the top enforcement division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Warrants have already been issued for your arrest regarding massive wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. Federal agents are currently waiting for you in the lobby of this building. The words hit Julian like a freight train. He completely shattered. The arrogant, boastful man who had proudly humiliated me at a holiday dinner was entirely gone. He scrambled desperately out of his plush leather chair and fell hard onto his knees against the freezing cold marble floor, his entire body shaking uncontrollably. He crawled toward the head of the table, clasping his hands together in a desperate, pathetic display of total submission. "Kendra, please!" Julian sobbed, thick tears streaming down his face, ruining his carefully curated image. "Please do not do this to me. I will pay it all back. I will work for you for free. We were married for 4 years. We shared a life together. You cannot send me to federal prison. Chloe completely abandoned me last night when she realized I was entirely broke. I have absolutely nothing left. I am begging you, have mercy on me." I looked down at the weeping, broken man groveling at my expensive heels. I looked at him and felt absolutely zero pity, zero lingering affection, and zero hesitation about destroying his pathetic life. "You threw your mercy away the moment you handed me those divorce papers," I replied, my voice completely dead and hollow. "You dug this grave with your own greed. Now you get to be buried deeply inside it for the rest of your miserable life. My elite security team will happily deal with you very shortly." I signaled with a brief nod to the security chief standing quietly by the frosted glass doors. 2 massive guards immediately stepped forward, grabbing Julian by his arms and hauling him up from the cold marble floor. He thrashed and sobbed uncontrollably, his expensive tailored suit wrinkling, as they dragged him away from the table toward a holding room to wait for federal authorities. His pathetic cries faded down the soundproof executive hallway, leaving a heavy, chilling silence in the grand boardroom. I did not watch him leave. Instead, I slowly turned my gaze toward the 2 remaining guests. Victoria swallowed hard, her throat visibly bobbing as she desperately tried to compose herself under my stare. She shifted her designer handbag onto her lap, gripping it like a physical shield against my lethal authority. She attempted to put on her haughty aristocratic mask, though it was now cracking severely under the immense corporate pressure. She cleared her throat, forcing a strained, unnatural pitch of confidence. She desperately wanted to distance her pristine family legacy from the criminal I had just destroyed. She looked at her father for vital support, but Harrison was staring blankly ahead. "That is highly unfortunate about Julian," Victoria stated, her voice quivering despite her best efforts to sound detached. "He always was a greedy, low-class opportunist. My family had absolutely no idea he was embezzling corporate funds. We distance ourselves completely from his disgusting criminal behavior. However, his personal legal troubles have absolutely nothing to do with our business here today. My father and Julian negotiated a binding contract with your firm. Sterling Financial might be yours, but my family loan for $5 million was officially approved. We expect those funds to be wired to our accounts immediately." I leaned back in my high-backed leather chair, steepling my fingers together. I allowed a slow, razor-sharp smile to finally cross my face. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey willingly step directly into the center of a steel trap. "You really do not understand how the modern financial world operates, Victoria. You rely entirely on your father's outdated legacy and Julian fabricated prestige. You never bothered to learn how money actually moves. If you had, you would have actually read the specific legal clauses in the collateral agreement your father signed yesterday." Harrison finally snapped out of his catatonic daze. He leaned forward, his hands shaking violently against the marble table. "The contract was a standard bridge loan," Harrison protested weakly, sweat dripping down his pale forehead. "We pledged the Buckhead estate as a temporary guarantee against the $5 million Vanguard Apex capital injection." Julian promised us that the funds would clear today, allowing us to restructure our commercial debts. We met your precise terms. The house is secure as long as we make the standard scheduled repayments. We have done absolutely nothing wrong in this particular corporate negotiation. David stepped forward, opening the second thick manila folder on the table. He slid it precisely in front of Harrison. "You committed massive financial fraud, Harrison," David stated with icy precision. "When you sat in this room yesterday, you presented a heavily manipulated portfolio to secure corporate funding. You blatantly lied about your liquidity, hiding 4 commercial loan defaults, providing fabricated financial documents to an investment firm in order to secure a multi-million-dollar loan constitutes severe federal fraud. That alone gives Vanguard Apex the absolute legal right to terminate the agreement and immediately seize the pledged collateral." Victoria gasped loudly, turning sharply to glare at her father. "What is he talking about?" she hissed, panic finally shattering her arrogant facade. "You told me the business was just experiencing a minor cash flow problem. You said the mansion was perfectly safe." Harrison shrank away from her, unable to meet her furious gaze. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, delivering the final fatal blow to their fake empire. "Your father has been completely broke for years, Victoria. And the trap you walked into yesterday was far more sophisticated than a simple fraud violation. Before you even walked into this building," I explained coldly, "Vanguard Apex quietly purchased every single one of your family outstanding debts from your previous lenders. We owned your subprime mortgages, your defaulted commercial loans, and your maxed-out credit lines. When your father signed that new contract yesterday, pledging the mansion as collateral, he unknowingly triggered a universal cross-default clause. The $5 million did successfully transfer this morning, however, because you were already in severe default to us on your previously acquired debts. Our automated collection algorithms instantly seized every single penny of that new loan." The devastating reality hit Victoria with physical force. Her mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. "You never got the money," I continued relentlessly. "It bounced directly back into my corporate accounts to cover a fraction of what you owe me. Because the loan is now in immediate default, due to your father-documented fraud, Vanguard Apex has officially executed the foreclosure clause on the Buckhead estate. The county judge signed the eviction order 30 minutes ago. By tomorrow morning, the bank will seize your prized historic mansion. You are entirely homeless, absolutely broke, and publicly ruined." Victoria erupted into violent, unhinged fury. She did not attempt to attack me. She turned viciously on her own father, screaming at the top of her lungs. She slapped Harrison across the face, calling him a pathetic, useless failure who destroyed her life. Harrison yelled back, blaming her lavish, uncontrollable spending for bankrupting the family in the first place. Their aristocratic disguise vanished entirely, replaced by ugly, desperate betrayal. The heavy boardroom door violently burst open, and Julian, temporarily breaking free from the aggressive guards for a brief second, screamed loudly that they had deliberately set him up. They tore into each other like starving wolves, completely destroying their own family right in front of my eyes. I watched their vicious frenzy for exactly 1 minute before I grew entirely bored of the pathetic spectacle. The satisfying thrill of the corporate kill had already begun to fade, replaced by a deep desire to simply purge my building of their toxic presence. I raised my right hand, signaling the security chief, who was waiting patiently by the frosted glass doors. He did not need verbal instructions. He immediately dispatched 4 heavily built guards into the center of the boardroom. The guards grabbed Harrison by his tailored shoulders, hoisting the struggling older man to his feet. Victoria shrieked as 2 other guards seized her arms, lifting her forcefully from the leather chair. She kicked her expensive heels against the marble floor, screaming my name, begging for a fraction of the mercy she had never shown me. I did not blink. I did not answer her. I simply turned my chair around to face the massive window looking out over the sprawling city, completely tuning out her frantic, hysterical cries. The heavy boardroom doors slammed shut, cutting off the noise instantly. The silence that washed over the room was pristine, beautiful, and absolutely permanent. By noon that same day, The financial news networks were having an absolute field day with the spectacular collapse of Sterling Financial. The story broke across every major media outlet in Atlanta, spreading like wildfire through the very elite circles Julian and Victoria had worshipped. The headlines were ruthless and unforgiving. Julian was officially indicted by federal prosecutors on multiple counts of severe corporate wire fraud and massive embezzlement. News helicopters circled the federal courthouse downtown, broadcasting live footage of Julian being escorted up the concrete steps in heavy iron handcuffs, his face hidden beneath his own suit jacket. He was denied bail due to the immense flight risk and the overwhelming mountain of forensic evidence we had handed directly to the federal agents. He was going to spend the best years of his life locked inside a concrete cell, entirely forgotten by the corporate world he tried so desperately to conquer. Victoria and her father faced an equally devastating, highly publicized ruin. Vanguard Apex executed the immediate foreclosure of the historic Buckhead estate with absolute legal precision. The county sheriff arrived at their pristine driveway the following morning, flanked by moving trucks and our corporate asset recovery team. The local society bloggers, the exact same people Victoria had tried to manipulate with her vicious social media posts, eagerly documented the entire eviction process. Photographs of Victoria, sobbing on the sidewalk while her designer furniture was hauled away, flooded the internet. Her wealthy friends, the country club socialites she thought were her loyal allies, instantly cut all ties. They blocked her phone numbers and revoked her exclusive memberships, treating her family name like a highly contagious disease. Chloe, realizing her meal ticket was on his way to federal prison, quietly packed her bags and fled the state, completely abandoning the wreckage she had helped create. Later that evening, the chaotic noise of the outside world finally faded into a peaceful, triumphant quiet. I stood on the sprawling terrace of my penthouse apartment, located at the very top of the Vanguard Apex tower. The cool November wind brushed against my face, carrying the distant rhythmic hum of the bustling city below. I held a crystal glass of rare vintage red wine, savoring the rich, complex flavor. The heavy, suffocating disguise I had worn for 4 long years was completely gone. I was no longer the quiet, unassuming typist, hiding in the corner of a toxic family gathering. I was exactly where I belonged, standing at the absolute pinnacle of the empire I had built with my own hands. The heavy glass door of the terrace slid open, and my mother walked out to join me. Evelyn looked radiant, dressed in a flowing silk evening gown, her presence exuding the calm, unwavering strength that had guided me through the darkest moments of this deception. She walked to the edge of the glass balcony, looking out over the glittering skyline, and gently clinked her glass against mine. The crystal produced a clear, resonant chime that echoed into the night. We did not need to discuss the brutal corporate slaughter that had taken place in the boardroom earlier today. The victory was already secured, the enemies were completely vanquished, and the absolute balance of power had been forcefully restored. We stood together in comfortable silence. 2 generations of fierce, unapologetic women who had learned to weaponize our brilliance against a world that constantly tried to underestimate us. I looked down at the streets of Atlanta, the glowing arteries of traffic pulsing with endless energy. I realized then that the greatest revenge was not simply the destruction of Julian and his toxic family. The true victory was reclaiming my own authentic identity, shedding the heavy armor of my false humility, and fully embracing the massive, undeniable power I wielded. I had survived their emotional abuse, dismantled their fraudulent lives, and protected my generational wealth with cold, calculated precision. The painful chapter was permanently closed, locked away in the ashes of their ruined legacies. The future belonged entirely to me, shining brighter than the diamonds around my neck, vast and completely unburdened. If you have ever been forced to hide your true potential just to make small, insecure people feel comfortable, let this story be your ultimate wake-up call. Never shrink yourself to fit into a room that cannot handle your brilliance. Step into your power, secure your legacy, and never apologize for the empire you are building. Thank you for following my journey to the end. Please like this video, leave a comment about your experiences with toxic family members, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of ultimate resilience and sweet, undeniable justice. Always remember your worth is never determined by those who are completely blind to your value. Keep building, keep fighting, and always protect your crown.